Hi, this is Jitfang Chin. Today I'm going to present my triangulated analysis of Odysseyware's online curriculum for ninth grade English. Odysseyware is a company that provides numerous online curricula for multiple educational settings. On one of its web pages, the company describes its program as ideal as a complete standalone curriculum or which can be used for blended and flipped classrooms, alternative and special education, credit recovery, RTI, one-on-one, and much more. For the purposes of this analysis, I am looking at the English 9 course as a standalone, online-only curriculum that may be used by a student in an independent study program. So in this scenario, the student would put in about 5 hours worth of work a week. This would be an asynchronous experience, which means the student would log in wherever he or she wants to. Multiple choice questions answered by the student would be automatically graded through the computer program, but a teacher would review the student writing. I analyzed one of 6 units in a year-long course for ninth grade. This course consisted of 14 lessons, 5 quizzes, 1 test, 6 projects, all designed around 7 assigned short stories. In particular, I looked at how the course taught writing. I'm actually using this curriculum in real life at my current job, but I'm adapting it for face-to-face instruction. But for this analysis, I'm pretending, or at least looking at the curriculum as if it would be used by someone without any modifications. I saw a couple of learning theories reflected in the way the course was structured. One would be behaviorism. Skills are broken into smaller steps, and there is some effort to release responsibility to students. Each lesson is broken up into several sections, and some of the sections are labeled as guided practice and independent practice. Moreover, at the end of the lesson, the student has to answer some questions, and if the percentage of correct answers falls below the student's set threshold, for example, 70%, then the student would have to repeat the lesson before he or she can move on to the next lesson, and then the quizzes and so forth. Another theory I saw reflected in the curriculum was emergent literacy theory. There is text-to-audio functionality in the course, which means that students could highlight a piece of text and then click on a button to listen to the text being read aloud. Short videos are also interspersed throughout the lessons, giving the students some oral and pictorial support. That way, the student can piggyback on his or her oral language and listening skills if he or she has some issues with the reading. I also saw some influence of family literacy theory in that Odysseyware provides parent accounts for parents and guardians to check in on the students. The parents have access to a parent handbook and can also call a hotline to get some help from the technical staff if there were problems logging in. They can also contact the teachers directly. There is an orientation video that can give the family some tips as to how to be successful on online learning platforms. Despite all that, I still felt that the curriculum coaching was very limited, and the messaging system was a little bit ineffective in that parents can see emails that are sent between the teacher and the student on one part of the site, but if students were to communicate with the teachers through each lesson, for some reason, parents couldn't see those emails. So if a student has issues with his or her work, the parent might still have a hard time figuring out what's going on. In terms of Common Core alignment, the writing demands of this program were pretty much aligned to what Common Core asked for. Common Core has three main types of writing. Odysseyware provides lots of opportunities for students to work on informative and explanatory essays, as well as short constructed responses. There were several persuasive argument essay assignments. However, Odysseyware did not have really many narrative writing opportunities. There were none in the unit that I looked at, but I glanced through a few of the other units and I saw there were a couple of prompts. So in that sense, that part is not aligned to Common Core. That said, I talked to some teachers from other schools, and it seems like, to be honest, many ninth grade teachers really don't teach very much narrative writing. So it's not aligned to Common Core, but I think it's, in my opinion, it's not really that big of a deal. Uh, Odysseyware explains to students what the Common Core wants them to do in terms of writing, but it doesn't model very much how to do that writing. There are a couple of examples, but I feel that the modeling could have been much more extensive. Common Core also asks for students to do some online publishing. Unfortunately, Odysseyware does not have the students do any kind of online writing beyond simple straight-out essays and responses. There's no writing community that's created online, no requirements to embed dynamic links within the writing. Although, by definition, because students need to submit the work online, there are a lot of keyboarding opportunities. I mean, students can only, they have to type. So at least that part is aligned to Common Core. There are also several research projects with student-chosen topics assigned within the unit, which is what Common Core does ask for. In terms of best practices, the Odyssey curriculum, I think overall, falls short of best practices in many ways. One thing that it does do well is Odysseyware has a write-up function that allows students to check for spelling and syntax mistakes. Berninger and Wynn in 2006 reported that students produce better writing when they use a word processor since it corrects for some spelling and grammar. I do feel, though, that this function could be more user-friendly. When students use Google Docs, for example, the spelling function works automatically, and students will see misspelled words underlined with like a squiggly red line. But for Odysseyware, you do have to remember to press a button in order to activate the write-up function. And a lot of students, it seems from what I've observed, often forget. The write-up function also, for some reason, assigns an arbitrary score for the readability of the text, and the score just doesn't really seem to make very much sense. When I attended training for Odysseyware, I was even warned by the trainer to tell students to ignore the score. So I think this is a bug that they need to work on. One best practice recommended for teaching writing is to use sentence combining to teach students to correct errors instead of teaching students formal grammar rules. Odysseyware, however, doesn't have that much practice for sentence combining and error correction. The lessons are structured such that most of them are really questions about texts, but there were a few lessons that were completely devoted to grammar and syntax. Like there was one lesson, for example, that was all about parallel construction in sentences. And there were many multiple points, teaching points included in the same lesson. So I felt that students are told what to do, but not given effective practice opportunities. Students can choose answers for multiple choice questions to identify which sentences could have been corrected, but they didn't have to like retype the sentences or actually practice writing correct sentences. One best practice that Zeri in 1999 recommended was that students who received vocabulary instruction that engaged them in playful activities were able to use the words more often in writing. Odysseyware does try to make vocabulary learning more interesting by providing 2 games for the students to play. Every lesson identifies several academic vocabulary very clearly at the top of the lesson. And these 2 games, one is an interactive flashcards game, and then one is a really cute spelling bee game. The students can practice spelling the words, and they can look at the definitions of the words. But in my opinion, because only 2 games were provided, the novelty could wear off quite quickly. And the games were pretty slow paced, and the definitions were not the student friendly explanations that Beck and Alia recommend. And the words are typically also tier 3 words, which are okay, and useful in writing literary essays, but not so much if you're trying to use those words for writing in other disciplines. Another best practice is teachers should provide rubrics or checklists to help students identify the strengths and needs. Rubrics also show teachers what they need to do to reteach students. Odysseyware provides rubrics for essay assignments. For example, one of the rubrics I saw has 5 levels, and each level has 2 to 5 features, so students could see what was required of them. But in my opinion, the rubrics could be more user-friendly. For example, the different aspects of writing could have been divided into a table format instead of a list. And since there were no student exemplars, it's really hard for students to see what kind of essay would be considered an excellent essay, and it's also hard for teachers to score those essays. There is no explicit process or requirement for the students to use the rubric as a checklist or to revise an essay after the initial teacher grading. One best practice is for students to use graphic organizers to help them with planning the essay and also to promote inquiry from the student. Odysseyware provides 2 graphic organizers in the first unit. One of the organizers resembled a flow map. The second one resembled more like a worksheet because there weren't really any boxes, just lines for students to write in. So my main issue was that there were really no instructions on how to use the graphic organizers and no sample. In one of the graphic organizers, there were not enough boxes for students to add evidence. So I don't feel that the way the graphic organizers have been shared is likely to promote inquiry within the students. Overall, I felt there were a lot of missed opportunities for best practices in the curriculum. For example, there are no forums for students to interact with each other, to interact with one another, and to build community. Odysseyware really needs to provide sample or model essays or links to more reading on the internet. The videos, in my opinion, should show and model students how to do something rather than just tell the students what needs to be done. And also by virtue of the fact that this is online curriculum, it is difficult for a company to provide a positive writing environment or individualized instruction for the students or physical spaces rich with words. It would also be challenging for the teachers to plan for conferences with the student or peer-to-peer conferences and also provide additional writing tasks. Overall, I would say one strength of Odysseyware Academy's curriculum is that the content of the lessons are largely aligned to Common Core standards. The platform is easy to use and visually appealing. However, the pedagogy is largely contrary to best practices for teaching writing. And they're pretty limited. The reading theory bases are also pretty limited.